The Outer Worlds, not to be confused with The Outer Wilds, is a game that made an impressively small splash. I want you to imagine having a stage set for you with the disastrous launch of another first-person role-playing game the year prior, only to sign an epic exclusivity deal and kill all of your initial momentum. It is rather interesting, having written this script alongside Fallout 76, to see how much relevance that 76 managed to maintain while The Outer Worlds has languished. It was seriously difficult to find people in a community primarily built around RPGs who had actually played enough of The Outer Worlds to have a conversation about the game. I think part of the reason that Outer Worlds gets a particularly bad rap is due to having been put up on a pedestal it was not equipped for. New Vegas and KOTOR 2 are both widely considered to be Patrician tier, controversial games yet considered greats. There was some aspect they had that's missing from The Outer Worlds, which is why I get requests for them and not this game. This is not an issue of time either. It's been over 3 years and the game is continuing to slide into obscurity, minus the recent remaster that bombed and made headlines for 6 hours, but that appears to be the publisher's fault, not Obsidian's. A good indicator for games are the resources that are created around them. To say that The Outer Worlds has fairly bare-bones documentation is putting it mildly. If the people who make wikis can't be bothered to fully document all of the skill checks in a quest, that means those people, who are the game's biggest fans, cannot be bothered with the labor of love that is recording and organizing that information for others to use. It is tough for any act that has to follow greatness for sure, but at the same time, Outer Worlds isn't underrated just because its other siblings were more famous. A lot of its reputation and lack thereof is earned by spurts of absolute mediocrity. The game has a bad opening which lasts a long time, so long in fact that it likely constitutes at least 1/5 of the overall runtime if not more. Imagine if you had to spend 5 hours in Helgen doing odd jobs until the execution sequence started. Of the bad intros I've played on this channel, Outer Worlds definitely has the one that objectively did the most damage to its player base. The opening cutscene establishes a tone. It starts with a corporate advert for a trip to Halcyon, a system wholly owned by corporations. It reveals that the ship in question is derelict at the edge of the system, but being monitored. A ship approaches and then it is a subversion of expectations. The cutscene was going smooth, but then there is an unexpected technical issue that breaks the flow of events. I think this was intended to be a joke, rather than a statement about this character we're being introduced to, possibly both. However, I am not laughing. Said technical issue is not relevant, and after wrestling for 20 minutes with the monster-making machine that is character creation, it's easy to forget this incident had even happened.
I think we're going to be keeping the helmet on in this game.
If it is minor, why bring it up? Because it's not minor. You broke the flow of the introductory cutscene for a joke that is not funny and barely says anything. What it is an ill omen as to the game's sense of humor. There are going to be many jokes that are not funny and barely say anything. The first few minutes of a game are very important for establishing the setting, themes, and tone. For reference, I still remember that the NCR soldiers in the New Vegas intro drunkenly stumble through the streets while waving their flag. A minor visual detail, yet relevant for characterizing the NCR's usage of the city compared to the no-nonsense Rangers and Caesar's Legion that we see outside of the city. Since the game is inspired by Firefly, let's use a similar moment in the film Serenity. We witness a daring escape, an analysis of that escape, a triple homicide, and then are given some speculative words by the antagonist about the very serious nature of the ship that his target is located on. Then introduced to that ship entering a planet's atmosphere only to see a part come flying off. The joke is also a subversion of expectations because typically a ship would enter the atmosphere effortlessly, but the key is that the technical issue is relevant to establishing the characters.
You told me those entry couplings would hold for another week.
That was 6 months ago, Captain.
The ship is not fully maintained because the crew isn't getting enough work to pay for all the repairs. Later in the film, a choice is made between keeping a score and killing someone running from a tragedy, and the captain chooses the money, citing a need to eat. A panel flying off of a ship serves as a natural transition between scenes that establishes a lighthearted tone, but indicates an underlying problem that leads to more serious moral conflicts.
You could have tossed the payload.
Tossed it. Zoe, I got bits falling off my ship. I got a crew. Ain't been paid. And oh yeah, powerful need to eat sometime this month.
Meanwhile, this guy's ship has a landing ramp that probably just needs some more grease. Isn't it funny that he has to keep pressing the button in order to get it to work? There is a key difference, and it's in this character spamming the button. This is a punchline, and as a result, the attention goes away from what this technical fault is saying about the character and setting a lighter-hearted tone to feeling cringe and uncertainty about whether or not I am supposed to be laughing. Yes, a ship ramp failing does say something about the character. It says that either he keeps his equipment in poor repair, or that he doesn't travel often enough to experience such technical faults. But I'm not coming to these conclusions when my eyes are rolling and I'm saying, "Oh no," under my breath.
Oh no. Oh no.
Even the ramp just stopping and needing a second button press to finish would be sufficient to establish that the game isn't a 100% serious and dramatic story. By the end of this, you will see how this sequence accurately represents the entire game. After this, the character reaches the cryogenic chamber and establishes that the people aboard have been kept there, as awakening them would have harmed a group called the Board's Bottom Line. However, the central conflict is going to be treated as a mystery, meaning that the game can only really introduce us to the main factions, principally the Board, as well as this man, Dr. Phineas Wells. Okay? Just the two of them? After selecting the player character out of 10,000 options, we experience character creation, then Wells makes his escape. Obviously, the Board is active in defending this colony ship from would-be intruders. This leads to our awakening, as well as more establishment of tone.
I'd see it done myself, of course, but the Board has a sizable bounty on my head.
Get it? It's funny that he has his bounty within reach of this drop pod. Now, of course, the introduction doesn't stop there.
Hawthorne should be close by. What in law's name? Is that him? Oh, that idiot. I told him to plant the beacon and move away, not stand there holding it. Oh well, no sense in letting his ship go to waste.
Thankfully, we're able to move at least, so maybe the game will let up now that we have gameplay. No, we are now in Emerald Vale, and we will be spending quite a bit of time here. See, the problem with the introduction doesn't just start at the tone of the first cutscene betraying the rest of the game. Emerald Vale is a lengthy sequence, longer than most people's first play session. After we leave, the game opens up and presents the player with options. But until that point, we are effectively trapped here. You can leave just as quickly as you can complete the first main quest. However, I'd ballpark that figure to be at least an hour, longer if there are literally any side diversions. And it should go without saying, longer still should you decide to reroll your character. About a quarter of players have not gotten past the Veil. For reference, that is a comparable drop-off in players to the Bell Gargoyles in Dark Souls. That is not a great rate of attrition for a game, considering how early and easy this is. Players are getting filtered by Edgewater. I love Steam achievement data. Instead of just taking my word for it that it's bad, I can point to the numbers. No, people who own the game and haven't played it are not counted. Global achievement stats count everybody who's ever booted the game up, then use an early achievement like the one to watch the first cutscene and use that as a curve. Outer Worlds will be thrown off a bit by being an Epic Game Store exclusive, meaning by the time it got to Steam, the word about the game's quality was out, but usually that just filters the haters out, meaning that losing a quarter of your players after the move to Steam is actually even worse because that was supposed to be your hardened core. So I guess let's crack this town open and look for the problem. I'd say things start with the first generic NPC we meet. Despite his injuries and isolation, he's focused on trying to recite the company's slogan. Even when he gives his gear to us, he advertises the benefits of Spacer's Choice weapons.
You've tried the best now. Now try the rest. Spacer's Choice.
The lieutenant is focused more on the fines our contact owes for illegal parking than the marauders 20 feet in front of her. The grave tender reveals that workers rent their grave plots. The barber says that he'll lose his job if he doesn't pay that rent. A worker says we're being sent to collect his rent because he's got a foot in the grave with plague. A manager says the payment she owes is actually for a worker who killed himself. Oh, and all of these come with, look, I'll call them jokes, but you'll have to determine yourself if they are.
Spacer's choice policy clearly stipulates that dead and as good as dead are two completely different properties of matter. Unless I'm dead, I'm contractually obligated to attend to my post. I will report that illegally grounded spacecraft if it is the last thing I do.
You're right. It's time we cross those marauders off, find whoever owns that ship, and file a full report. Then it's gonna be laminated.
Here we go.
You were probably poking around my things. I really shouldn't leave my letters sitting out in the open.
Shading.
Yeah, I was the closest living person relative to his body at time of death. I'm the one who found him, you see, so I pay the fines. Suicide's a crime. The legal term is irreparable damage to company property. What Eugene did to himself was vandalism.
Oh, God. So, if you were wondering why this game is considered to be anti-capitalist, this is why. Now, I didn't have to play through the game even a second time to be confident in the conclusion that this is a false impression of the game. No, the game is not communist propaganda, but I don't blame you if you thought it was. I think the game is trying to establish how bad things are for workers, since it'll be a recurring element throughout the game. Establish it early so that we can just assume that it's going on in the background later. Problem is, this game has the heavy-handedness of a silverback gorilla. The second that any good writer would be confident that they have made their point, Outer Worlds reiterates it 5 more times just to make sure. The corporations have bent the law to an absurd degree. The corporations have bent the law to an absurd degree. The corporations have bent the law to an absurd degree. It is very tiresome, and I don't blame anybody for tapping out thinking that Outer Worlds was going to take the next step in corporate faux wokeism. The point at which I'm being told that the system discourages the inevitable problem of suicide by taxing whichever poor person happens to discover the corpse is... I don't know. Like, it's a joke, but it's also a very serious indictment. Do I really need to explain not just the logical problems of that policy, but how that would inevitably get abused? It only makes sense if it gets treated as an absurd punchline, but is that something we're seriously laughing about? You have to pass by the guy's desk during the main quest, and his teeth can play a role in a big reveal in the main story. Whenever you tell a joke about this particular topic, you don't start by humanizing the victim. It comes off as someone who wants to imitate Gen Z dark humor, but lacks a key understanding of why that kind of casual brutality makes people laugh. Why go to all the effort of setting up this character to be a noticeably missing person after his passing, just to serve as a punchline of a cheap joke about corporate policy?
Yeah, I was the closest living person relative to his body at time of death.
As much as I'd love to explain the finer points of constructing good gallows humor, all I'm really going to say here is that this goes about it entirely wrong. It's not even that it's a tasteless joke, but that it pointlessly destroys a piece of the world building to tell it. They actually did this with Hawthorne as well. They made a joke out of his death, then have 2 different characters be devastated with the news, one of whom we see deal with it for the entire game. And the thing is, that's just an Edgewater thing. This part of the game is constructed in a way that is alien to the other parts. Example given, after we leave Edgewater, we re-establish contact with the man who awoke us. Notably, there's no slapstick humor or fast-talking quips. The game is taking itself seriously, and I find myself suddenly reinvested. The next area we visit is Groundbreaker. It's the only place in the colony that isn't under the board's control because its inhabitants took a piece of leverage and used it to its fullest advantage to establish their independence. The game is perfectly capable of nuance, as well as restraining its humor to make a serious point. It's just that, for whatever reason, they decided not to do this with Edgewater, and that Edgewater was going to be the opening act of the game. A very, very long opening act. So I can't blame anybody for hating the game's humor or thinking that it was going to have the nuance of a Twitter post, or saying that the doctor here is actually Rick Sanchez. It's a really bad comparison that's predicated almost entirely on phenotype, yet it persists because a quarter of players do not make it to the point where you would realize that it's not accurate. I cannot blame them for that, though.
You guys, sure you don't want to be naked and just use your fists? I mean, why not, guys? We only live once. Not even for like 10 minutes?
While we are in the Vale, I want to talk about gameplay, as it's unique compared to the rest of the game. The game has 3 regular difficulty options and an alternate mode called Supernova. Really, it has 2 options, hard and survival. The game is rather easy, even on hard. Supernova is a bit more difficult, but in reality, playing through Supernova is a test of patience rather than skill. It's a lock-in difficulty. You can only go down, so you are committing to the bit. There is hunger, thirst, and a sleep meter. Companions can die permanently, and you have to rest to restore crippled conditions. Durability is more punitive if your equipment breaks. You can only fast travel back to the ship. You can only sleep inside the ship, and you can only manually save inside the ship. However, the game does autosave at any loading screen, which you can use and abuse to your advantage. Thankfully, Supernova actually came out with the game, meaning that it's integrated fairly naturally compared to some alternative survival modes I've covered in the past. However, aside from not being able to save or fast travel, Supernova didn't really seem to change much once I got out of the Vale. I had to play a little bit more deliberately. I had to actually plan trips around how long I thought they would take, and I had to pay more attention to companions' equipment. Other than that, once I was out of the Vale, the gameplay experience was pretty much the same as playing on hard. Literally the only way that you as a viewer will be able to reliably tell which playthrough you're watching is whether or not the companions are wearing armor. A really annoying thing was concussions, which you get from being near a landmine going off. I did not specify stepping on them because the hitbox is very big. This is just a vibe check, it's not difficult. You will go by 5 places that could have mines and nothing, and then there's suddenly an area that remembers to use them. You can get the movement speed pretty high, so you'll be going fast and having fun when all of a sudden a landmine goes off. You don't have a lot of time to respond, which I think is the point with landmines. Very realistic. That said, they are hardly fatal. You basically just get a concussion and lose 20% of your health. I'm sure there are plenty of people in history who would have enjoyed being let off so lightly. That's not very realistic. The concussion is the vibe killer though. You get slapped with a penalty to mind attributes until you sleep it off. Given their importance, the couple times I got concussed, I saw no reason to not immediately fast travel back to the ship, sleep it off, and then walk back out to continue whatever it was I was doing. It's not difficult because in every circumstance that I hit a mine, I wasn't in a fight. It's not like I carelessly walked into a mine during combat and it got me killed. That would actually be pretty good. I'm just being minorly inconvenienced and punished for stepping on a landmine by having to take a walk of shame back. RIP to the time I had to walk back to the ship concussed and over-encumbered. I should have listened to the advice to get the perk that lets you fast travel when you are over-encumbered. I know. That was some real gameplay, I'll tell you. Not to over-reference a certain game that did landmines better, but putting them around base perimeters and using them to alert enemies? I mean, stealth is supposed to be a playstyle in Outer Worlds. Landmines in games are intentional annoyances designed to slow you down and make you pay more attention. Done properly, they can make sure you don't turn your brain off and that you actually engage with the game critically. In my view, the main problem with Outer Worlds isn't the lack of fatal consequences to stepping on the mines. It's that they're teaching the player to be paranoid and take things slowly and then not using them very often after Emerald Vale. Why would you front load your game with the annoying level design mechanics? That's my overall point. By themselves, they are annoying, but the goal here is to demonstrate just one more reason why players don't like the introduction of the game. The design principles almost seem to indicate the goal is to discourage people from playing. I also think the problem would be better if there was some kind of expensive consumable that removes concussions while out in the field. Funny thing too, our vision isn't actually blurry from the explosion, rather the explosion creates an effect that floats around our heads. You can see it anytime the companions get concussed. To drag this back a bit, gameplay in Outer Worlds is alright. It's an evolution of gameplay that was presented in Fallout New Vegas. There is some stuff added like a dodge mechanic and you can augment the player speed now. The VAT system was replaced with a time dilation ability. I would not say that time dilation is necessarily a VATS clone since it functions almost completely differently. But all the cores are there and are either improved or at least a side grade in some respect. Of course, New Vegas wasn't really known for its gameplay so much as how its gameplay intersected with its role-playing. Outer Worlds has the gameplay more as a spacer between the role-playing segments, which draws unfair comparisons because New Vegas being weak at gunplay was accepted because of the strong role-playing. Taking Outer Worlds at face value as a shooter, well, it's pretty boring. Pretty much the only weapon I liked, barring the science weapons that we'll talk about later, was the plasma carbine. Only problem is, it's completely busted. My character who had literally no points in any offensive skills could still get pretty easy kills with it. I guess I just like weapons with charge-up functions because it breaks up the monotony of point and click. But Outer Worlds presents as almost a stock template of a first-person shooter. It has the archetypal weapons you expect, and it has 3 universal ammo types that drop in heavy abundance, so you never have to worry about any kind of ammunition management. It's starting to sound a little familiar to some other game I talked about with fairly similar issues.
Suspicious. She still got it.
Probably the funniest part of Fallout 76 was that Outer Worlds got uplift from its disastrous launch. Instead of getting to live comfortably in the shadow of Bethesda, Obsidian was suddenly supposed to replace them. But Obsidian was always a shade-loving company. They were a AA studio that got to play in the AAA space. You can even see when they post cringe compilations like the Outer Worlds 2 trailer that they're still trying to lean on the years dead notion that they are outsiders looking in.
And for no reason, people running. These pointless slow-motion shots make everything seem cool and should bolster pre-sale numbers.
When, in reality, they're owned by Microsoft now, and they took Epic's money to do a 1-year exclusive release. Yeah, let's be honest, that also did not help people's perception of the game. I mean, Microsoft buyouts, that happens. Who isn't owned by them at this point? But signing an Epic exclusivity deal was, especially in 2019, basically a lethal blow to any kind of lasting impact in the PC market. I mean, I didn't play the game at launch for precisely that reason, which you can see in the review scores, 9s across the board except for the PC publications. Now why does that matter? Well, basically, the long-term staying power for those in the Bethesda sphere always hinges on the PC market. Of course, it was the decision of the ever-elusive management, who seems to be a common point in all of the Obsidian stories. Look, at some point, if I start justifying a streak of bad decisions as being the fault of some ever-elusive producer, you are free to say I've sold out to some corporation. Which, of course, is ironic given the aforementioned anti-capitalist vibes people got. Yeah, this is a game about how corporations can be a bit of a bad thing being sold under the umbrella of the de facto monopoly on video games. Of course, I'm not one to say that as a criticism in itself. Gotta get paid, you know? It should be the goal of any successful company to one day sell out and have its talent leave to start fresh, independent studios. A circle of life for game dev, if you will. But it is strange how much institutional money got involved just to turn out a product that could not integrate role-playing into the gunplay like New Vegas. Now, some of this can be attributed to old Jsaw himself, you know, the sole individual responsible for creating New Vegas in just 6 days when management had promised the 7th. And that's why game reviewers don't work on Sundays. Sawyer is credited as a design director, but he says all he did was some weapon balancing, which is an important detail because you're emulating the vision of something without the person who had that original vision. Hence why Outer Worlds feels more like an emulation of New Vegas rather than a spiritual successor. There is a reason the gameplay is unique in Emerald Vale though, and that's the fact that you're limited to a single companion. You can recruit a second, but he will refuse to accompany you until after you've left the area. This is important as the companions basically break the game over their leg. You would think, as I initially had, that a difficulty mode which chances perma-killing your companions would incentivize going without them, especially since there are perks you can get to improve yourself without them. However, in reality, a companion-focused build is probably the most powerful in the game. Imagine, if you will, this vampire that comes crawling out of the cryopod. It's physically frail and almost completely incapable of fighting on its own, and yet it's about to change the colony forever. Parvati, our first companion, is a good stepping stone to better things to come. She has no self-confidence, which is great because it means that our character can gaslight her. Literally.
Wish I could do that.
Honey, my lockpicking skill is almost completely non-existent. You did that for me, and now I'm gonna take credit. Now, stacking leadership skills, you can give the companions more health and make them do more damage. Critically though, you can also augment their ability to provide you with skill ups. Now, as interesting as that sounds, here's where it gets broken. Whenever you use a companion ability, they are all generally the same, the companion will say equip, then does some kind of damage and stun. Parvati slams the enemy with a giant hammer. They'll teleport to complete this action, but importantly, they stop time to do it. Now, you are locked into watching the companion do this, and that does get repetitive, but companion number 2 is not. They can keep shooting the helplessly frozen enemies.
Here's a little trick I learned in prison.
So my job in combat, on the Supernova character anyways, was to sit back and coordinate companions. Weirdly, this is not the first game I've played for this channel where the only buttons I pressed for an entire playthrough were the X, C, and V keys. Like, what are the odds that it would specifically be those 3 keys? My character himself is almost completely useless. In fact, I ended up getting hit with a flaw that reduced my offensive skills by 20%, knocking most of them down to 0. Flaws are these occasional pop-ups where something you encounter triggers the possibility of getting slapped with penalties. Common examples would be stuff like phobias, addictions, or permanent impairments. Flaws were meant to be forced on Supernova. I think someone realized that potentially crippling a character with a permanent movement speed penalty over something that is arbitrarily triggered, that might not be a good idea. Anyways, I'm just telling the companions what to do, but my aura is so inspiring that I can give them more health and make their guns do more damage. Also, my character needs an inhaler. My healing affects the companions, but it just looks like my character sitting at the back, pointing at enemies and suffering from frequent asthma attacks. Towards the end of the game, the crew was decked out in heavy power armor and all lugging around heavy machine guns. You might be thinking that they would have preferences, but no. You can just give them whatever, so it's best to just give them heavy armor and weapons and watch as they shred enemies who are completely immobilized. Even though we don't have a second companion yet, Parvati's ability still instantly bails us out of danger. But it doesn't stop there. Companions augment skills to an increasing degree. They are even affected by the equipment that they wear, allowing you to get some pretty ridiculous skill values out of companions. For reference, the perk which augment your abilities if you don't have any companions max out at 10, and only 20 for dialogue. For all skills perhaps, but if you max your determination skill to 150, you can learn how to politely ask your companions to go back to the ship and send someone else out. Meaning that eventually I could open every lock in the game without having to spend a single point in lockpicking. Originally the skills maxed at 100 and it was the DLC that increased the skill cap and added new perks since the level cap was raised as well. Perhaps the most hilarious instance of using this ability was when I needed to unlock a door to escape a building that was going to explode. And so I asked one of my companions to go back to the ship and send someone to help me with the door. That's determination right there. By having the right combination of companions, I could max out every single speech check in the game. There were only a couple checks I could not pass because they involved weapon skills. You don't get this benefit on the ship though, but the only checks that are on the ship are either perception checks when talking to companions, or ironically, leadership skill checks. Yeah, one of the companions ambushed me and threatened to leave the crew, and they bet it all on the only skill that this vampire was actually good at. Needless to say, once we get our second companion, things are going to be smooth sailing. Unless we run into primals, even at max level those things still flatlined the squad. And ironically, they live in Emerald Vale. One of the planets got shut down under the pretense of dangerous monsters, and there are dangerous monsters there, but nothing in the game seemed to be able to match the danger level of these gorillas. So having a single companion, not much ability to roam, the most dangerous enemies in the game, almost no money, and a need to eat means that Emerald Vale is Supernova at its most interesting. It's a shame that it doesn't really seem to help Outer Worlds with its attrition problem though, since most people are going to be playing on, at most, the journalist difficulty that Obsidian called hard. Further exacerbating the me not shooting enemies thing is the fact that there is an early perk you can get that awards more experience if your companions land the killing blows. So you're gonna see me just kind of running around waiting for Parvati to finish things up. So not only am I taking credit for their accomplishments, I'm literally stealing their own experience points to then further level my own abilities. I don't think this should be a standalone perk, but rather the level 80 perk for inspiration. The issue with it being a standalone ability is that it encourages a passive playstyle, whereas tying it to a leadership skill means that you were committing to the whole let companions do everything bit anyways. To explain leveling, you get flat experience for actions and quest progress that level up your character level. When you level up, you earn skill points that you then invest into a broader skill type up until one of those skills hits level 50. Then you invest in the skills individually. Each skill has perks automatically unlocked by certain level thresholds. Some of these are just percentage effects, others do unlock new functionality for the skill. It's a decent system. I really like that speech has been divided into 3 skills and given combat effects, but I didn't talk about it in my script originally because beyond being a leveling system, I really didn't notice that much out of skills. I was largely focused on making the skills bigger to pass speech checks, not what the skills were actually offering my playstyle. In the early game, I would actually bank points just on the off chance that I was really close to passing an upcoming check. Part of it is that you really don't have that much agency surrounding skill points. For instance, intelligence does not affect skill point gain per level, only critical hit damage. So no playing a low damage big brain to rake in those early skill points. There's also no agency surrounding skill perks. I don't think there are any perks which are inherently negative, but this lack of agency means that I have to dump twice as many points into a skill to get a later effect that I do want. The lack of difficulty also means it's not a system you have to learn or make plans around. Half the things that were happening in combat would surprise me because I didn't actually know what all skill perks I even had, and they were having unexpected effects in combat. There are also regular perks which you unlock every other level. You also get perk points from taking on flaws, but you don't have to take too many to end up unlocking most of the perks you ever want. The system's less about taking a bunch of perks to help distinguish your build and more unlocking the essential perks that everyone needs. Only a couple really stand out as being a build-dependent thing, example being science weapon perks. For instance, I can't really imagine a character that would not benefit from having 50 kilograms extra max encumbrance. But if you're playing a handguns build, then you can skip the perks tied to the science weapons. It's a weird system. I could definitely feel my character was progressing, but I wouldn't say it's particularly satisfying, probably because I had no clue what they were progressing toward on either run. And it doesn't help that certain parts of character builds are immutable and others are not. Attribute points are permanent, but skills aren't. So in theory, you could decide to switch to a melee build, except you need a completely different set of attributes to actually do that, so you'll need to replay Emerald Vale. And attributes cannot be leveled, only minorly augmented with equipment. I'd say the system is definitely confused about what it wants to be, stuck in the middle of a harder core RPG versus a more casual, low-commitment experience, which is not where you want to be when you're asked to make the big decisions about what all your character is good or bad at. The fact that I forgot to talk about leveling in a role-playing game kind of speaks to the overall problem with leveling in Outer Worlds. So let's dive into the story and see what filtered 25% of players. The conflict in Emerald Vale is based around our new ship. Specifically, it is broken. There is a single part we need to fix it, which just drives me insane. We are one part away from death, which was a recurring plot element from Firefly, but the game never again acknowledges this. We never ask if we should go try to find a spare regulator. Trust me, I have the money for spare parts. Edgewater has a power regulator, but they're using it. The town boss says we can have one, but we have to take it from the botanical labs. There are people living there, thus creating a basic conflict. We have to choose who to deprive of power. Or, I don't know, we could wait for one of those ships that comes by frequently and see if they have one. Surely somebody, somewhere, has a power regulator for sale. Was Hawthorne gonna do the main quest if he had survived? Did Ada tell him it was broken before he left? It's a pretty weak pretense, and the only reason the game has to use it is because if the player leaves, they've cut the runtime of the game down by a significant fraction. This isn't like Good Springs where the player could just run off and go pick the sheriff and Prim instead, which really wouldn't be a problem if Edgewater was a better sequence. And don't even try to pull a, well, we never see any ships actually land card. Why would they store resources out on their dock, have vending machines located there, multiple guards, and have their law enforcement policing illegal parking trying to bypass their docking fees, if the only ships that landed were the cargo carriers picking up Saltuna and dropping off supplies? Surely just waiting and buying a replacement regulator with money we earned from bounty hunting would suffice. Why can Wells call us through a Bluetooth headset on the planet but not call our ship until after we leave? Is it because powering a radio is more energy costly than powering the shipboard AI? I'm sure if he's made it this far on the run, he could send us a spare regulator. Let's be real, the power regulator is a very sloppy premise to force players to complete the Emerald Vale dilemma. And because the premise of this quest is so sloppy, it further contributes to an arbitrary feeling of the conflict. What we will do is not our only option. It only is in the story because this is a video game. Video games are inherently limited in ways like this. It takes a lot of effort to account for all of the possible options in a quest to a satisfying degree. A lot of video game stories go out of their way to create very good reasons why the few options allowed are the player's only options. It doesn't have to be this way. The simplest thing to do would be to remove the ship from the equation. The problem is that we can board the ship in the first hour, but won't actually use it for another 3 or 4 hours. So why introduce the ship that early? Here's a better solution. The Unreliable is parked in a secret location, but the knowledge of this location died with Hawthorne. Wells tells us that our first objective is to locate the Unreliable and use it to take off. The Edgewater Constable and the Botanical Gardens Guard routinely scout the Vale and both know where their ship is, but they're tight-lipped, telling us that they'll need approval from their boss to tell us. In order to find out the location of the ship, we have to complete the quest. The ship is not broken, it's simply being held over our heads to manipulate us into doing work for these factions. This also has a gameplay effect. Now, our only possessions are what we can carry. On Supernova, we'd have to sleep in beds we find and cannot fast travel. It would lend additional value to the ship by forcing us to be homeless until we acquire it. Note that this is simply addressing one problem with Emerald Vale. The whole sequence would need to be completely redone in order to fix the game's actual attrition issues. I've already established the tonal problems. The deserters living in the botanical labs aren't much better. You would think that they would have some pretty strong senses of individuality among them, to balance out the pro-corporate drones we've met so far. It really feels like we're getting the kid's glove version of Monarch, a conflict we'll see later in the game. But that's not a conflict that needed a dumbed-down version. The game constantly feels like it's underestimating its audience, and that can get really tiring. Thompson wants us to talk to the deserters before we shut off their power because he wants the workers to come back to Edgewater. This is when we meet Adelaide. She was a flavor specialist, basically a higher educated position in Spacer's Choice. She came out here and started sustaining herself, and others began to move out here with her. The fact that there is an out here to move to is an acknowledged statement. Spacers used to be all over the Vale, now they're reduced down to the main cannery complex. I'm pointing that out because if this was a Bethesda story, these people would have just moved out here and there wouldn't be much elaboration on where their buildings came from. Adelaide obviously doesn't want us to shut off her power, nor is she amicable to going back to Edgewater. She tries to reverse Uno the offer. What if we shut off Edgewater's power instead? They have an armed defense force, so no. And she does a lot of emotional manipulation. She tries to suggest to this creature of the night that heroes wouldn't take their power away, because clearly vampires go for moral arguments. Then she says that we would be helping the poor workers by cutting their power, since they would be forced to move here. Then she invokes Parvati's dead father, blaming Spacers for his demise. And then she basically just leaves it at those arguments. She doesn't seem to realize that we are seriously going to cut her power. My first playthrough, after clearing the geothermal plant and basically getting to the big red button that makes the decision, I came back to her and was appalled that I wasn't able to warn her that the power was going to be going off in 10 minutes. But then she has the gall to act surprised when it does happen. She also adamantly refuses to believe that we are from Earth, suggesting that we are delusional and or a drug addict. Not really an endearing characteristic.
I could do without the mockery. If you don't want to tell me where you're from, that's fine by me. Oh dear, I see what's happening. You've been taking Adrena time. That's the thing about growing old. Your eyes start to fail. Elsewise, I would have seen you for the snake that you are, chopped you into pieces and roasted you on a spit.
The crux of the conflict is pretty straightforward. Spacers does not offer a very high standard of living. People are getting sick from common ailments, which Adelaide correctly deduces is caused by vitamin deficiencies compromising people's immune systems. I really hope being able to make simple observations like that doesn't become plot relevant later. Adelaide is capable of growing better food and creating remedies. The issue, which we do have to discover by ourselves, but is revealed to us if we don't.
The secret is human corpses,
she said to the necromantic lord of darkness. I really don't care. I created 10 human corpses on my way over here. I could go get you more bodies if that's what you want. Hell, I farmed marauders for a couple levels in order to buy mag picks. There's probably a decade's worth of fertilizer sitting out there for the taking. Part of the Edgewater dilemma is informed by events that happen later in the game, which the player has no way of knowing about their first time. I guess this is to give it a level of replayability, that you would do this a second time and have more context. So here are the problems. The best quest outcome is determined by whether you go for story ending A or B, as in the broader ending, to the entire game. If you side with the doctor that awoke us, then the best thing to do is to cut Adelaide's power, then install her as the leader of Edgewater. If you side with the board, the best thing to do is to cut Adelaide's power and immediately leave as soon as you have the regulator. But what about the Edgewater conflict? What about it? There's no long-term solution to what's going on here. Best thing we can do is reform the whole problem, but I don't think there's really a best ending to Edgewater. Part of the issue is that the game hasn't revealed all of the components of the decision, because it's trying to make the central conflict a mystery. So really it just comes down to whether you think Adelaide or Reed Thompson should be in charge. Adelaide is more technically capable, but I don't think she's suited to leading a large group of people. I don't really think she comprehends that when Thompson chose people to die, it was because there was a shortage of resources. You've got 2 sick people and 1 cure. It's not great, but it's also not fully Reed's fault that Spacer's choice is, in some instances, quite literally killing them. Thompson would be better at leading the group, but he's obviously indoctrinated into the belief structure that's creating the problem in the first place. I think Obsidian is aiming to make a decision people will discuss to death, so it's got elements of moral grayness and ammunition so that people can entrench themselves in this conflict. Problem is, it's not really worth discussing on its own, and something like this is definitely not worth losing 25% of your players over. It's just not a great design vision. But we are finally out of the Vale. Once we break Atmo, Phineas calls us up. He was going to have contact with us the entire time, but an explosion thankfully knocked that capability out during the tutorial, and I guess he didn't think to try calling Hawthorne or Ada before now. I only went back to the ship like 1,000 times while I was in the Vale. Makes one wonder at the alternate reality version of this game where Phineas did talk to us during Edgewater how things would have gone. What insights would he have shared? He says that what is going on in the Vale is happening across Halcyon, but I'm unclear which part he is referring to, the poor working conditions or something else. Phineas doesn't tell us what the central conflict is because he doesn't really know the details yet. I'm not sure why it has to be a mystery, but sure. We'll talk about it when we get there. Wells wants our help to revive the other Hope colonists to help deal with the crisis he doesn't understand. He says the underlying problem is a lack of supply, and he's put a lot of stock into the idea that there are people aboard the Hope who can deal with that problem. We'll need more details before we can discuss that. Wells wants us to go to Stellar Bay in order to meet a contact who will tell us where to get the chemicals we need to revive the colonists. We can go to Monarch directly, but we'll be fairly low level and in a mildly dangerous area. Our other option is to head to the Groundbreaker and buy a nav key to land directly at Stellar Bay. However, when we arrive, our ship is grounded by a board official. This is where the story branches, since after informing this person that the captain they admired has perished, we are given the option to turn Phineas in. Although Outer Worlds has some fairly linear hub areas, its main quest isn't exactly linear. I wouldn't say it's branching, more interwoven. Turning Wells in doesn't actually betray him for some time, so you can play the situation to end up with a nav key to Byzantium, a city full of the system's elite. Or you can leave, meet with our contact on the Groundbreaker, and get the nav key to Stellar Bay. Both routes see us getting keys to the other for free later on, unless you're me and stupidly buy both. This was on my second playthrough too. I really have no excuse for this low IQ move. Let's go with the Wells route first though, since that's what I imagine a person out of time and most players would probably do. The Stellar Bay nav key is going to run us 10,000 bits, however the seller does have some good work lined up should we be short. But in both cases, I already had 10k by the time I got to Gladys. Edgewater seems designed to give you close to that amount if you play it through entirely. That or the amount is designed around how much you would get if you play it entirely. I have to imagine that was intentional, but I do wonder about the person who put in the effort to make sure the amount was just right. Seems like a lot of very intentional design that got sabotaged by the writing. Anyways, Gladys wants us to head down to a place called Roseway where she thinks something big is happening and take advantage of the situation to steal research. Roseway is a research town under the Anti-Cleo brand, which for a short period transmitted a call for aid before stopping. This was seen as unusual since corporations aren't big on admitting when they have issues. Something big does seem to have happened, since most of the area is wiped out and full of outlaws and raptidons. I mean, it seems just like Edgewater, only the people here are acknowledging the state of things, and this seems to have happened very recently. Perhaps what is most interesting to discover in research, however, is that this area was created before Edgewater. There are 3 main situations we can deal with, which can net us 7,000 bits. However, we actually have options here. Crazy, I know. We could sell the research, or we could return it to the researchers. But Roseway is... there's something unfinished about it. It's a whole area with its own faction, but it's apparently impossible to max out Cleo's reputation. It's also not acknowledged in the ending, which verbosely acknowledged every other minor thing that happened.
Bolstered by her status as savior of humanity, Lilia Hagen ushered sublight salvage to a new golden age.
The conflict is also undercooked. It really does feel unfinished, which isn't surprising. Roseway was the game's vertical slice, meaning that the developers focused on finishing this particular sequence early to get a handle on how the game was playing. It's also noticeably less reliant on humor and takes things a bit more seriously, meaning the tonal issues began mid-development rather than being a systemic problem. Okay, so Anti-Cleo was doing research on raptidons, the only problem being that raptidons are native to Terra 1, which was cordoned off because of raptidons. Anti-Cleo can't legally return to Terra 1, now named Monarch, so they brought the raptidons to Terra 2. Then a gang of outlaws, for unrelated reasons, assaulted the facility and took over the research wing. This allowed the Raptidons to escape into the broader area, wreaking havoc across Roseway. This is all implied to have happened within a couple days, despite our travel time and the week I spent doing things here. Hammer time, you know? The Clio's researchers want the outlaws out, while the outlaws are looking to steal research, just like us. The difference being that we are scavengers while the outlaws are predators.
Illegal salvage. Low-life vultures picking the flesh off the dead.
So after we make friends with the researchers and find out what research there is to steal, we set out and eventually find the covert lab. The obvious joke being that they signposted that it was a covert lab, but it's not exactly like Roseway was a central commerce hub. Nobody was supposed to know about this entire area. You can meet with the outlaw leader, Cassandra.
We liberated that research. We did not steal it. And yes, a few scientists were caught in the crossfire. This lab is a prison, not a place of work. Those men were not scientists. They were indentured laborers. We liberated them. They should be thanking us. I do remember one of those feckless scientists yammering something about a Raptidon suppression system. How should I know? I left his body where I shot him.
You can see the edges where Roseway is supposed to fit into the rest of the puzzle. Like Adelaide and several other characters we'll meet, there are forces in the system which are rebelling against the board, and these forces come in varying shades of morality. Adelaide just wanted freedom from spacers. She wanted to be able to leave town, live alone, and grow plants. Her rebellion was an extension of her grief, hence why when she's put into a position of power, she becomes vindictive and judgmental. Cassandra, on the flip side, is a murderous criminal who dresses up her actions in a veil of ideological rebellion. She is intelligent, but that just means she knows how to create an effective mask. I think that the implication we're supposed to take away is that we can't judge her too harshly, considering we're pretty much here for the same reason she is. It is interesting because we are only here to commit crime and make money to pay for other ventures. Phineas didn't insist we come here, nor does the board send us here. So while she is right in the assertion that we do not have good intentions, we also did not cut a bloody swath through the people that we claim to be liberating. If she was just honest and said that her goal was to make a profit and that she liked to comfort herself in the knowledge that she was sticking it to the board, then I wouldn't take too much of an issue with her. But it's the fact that, like Adelaide, she tries to manipulate us with the idea that what she is doing is somehow heroic. Overall, while I don't mind her character being written in this way, it is that it's contained within this almost forgotten corner which is perplexing. This is where I bring up one of the companions we recruited on the Groundbreaker, Felix. Felix was born outside the system. He's been given a taste of freedom, but is currently relegated to a menial labor position on the Groundbreaker. He boldly asks to sign on, and surprisingly there are people who don't like Felix despite not understanding what it is he brings to the game. Felix hates the board, and he hates how low the standard of living is for anyone who wants to be free of the system. He is presented as being naive and generally inexperienced, but with a strong moral conviction. He's important because he showcases that the mentality of just destroying the board blindly is inherently childish. But people don't seem to like him, mostly because he will speak out of turn, inherently not realizing that the vehement anti-board antics that they showcase is basically just a reflection of Felix. I think a lot of people are made uncomfortable by the fact that Felix is just a reflection of their own hatred of the board. Felix is in love with people like Cassandra and anybody else that seems like they're cutting it free from the board, because he doesn't have the experience needed to realize how flawed these people are. We can't have Felix on the team during Adelaide's quest, but we can during Cassandra's. But the writers don't use this as an opportunity to give Felix a chance at early characterization. And I doubt this was an issue with the game being a vertical slice, as there are other points where companions do contribute to conversations, but it is noticeable that they don't have much to say when talking to Cassandra. In part, this is because you can only have 2 companions with you at any given time. Occasionally, companions will wait by the door, usually whenever they have a favor they want to ask you when first arriving in an area. I actually think this would be a good idea to signal which companions it would be best to bring to different areas. It tends to be a bit random which companion is ideal where. There are some general rules, like bringing Max to any pro-board conversation, but I still think a clear signpost that you should bring Felix so he can meet Cassandra and realize how horrible she is would go a long way. If anything plot relevant happens, everybody pretends like they were there to see it. It does not help that often a companion's only contribution to a conversation will be a single quip that you'll wish had never happened.
I want it. Cobwebs and all. Interested?
Oh sure, that sounds like a real easy job.
Given the Firefly inspirations, I wish this game used the companions a lot more like the crew members. There was typically a 3-person combo used for most scenes, but the show would switch things up and make use of less traditional characters whenever possible. Instead, I think I'm just supposed to guess which companions might be good for a quest, or run through the game 3 times using 2 companions fully for each run. Given the aforementioned quips, I don't see the companions' contributions adding replay value because a minority of them are ever meaningful. And I'm sure somebody will eventually just compile all of those conversations into a best of compilation on YouTube anyways. Instead of making more companion quests, make the companions part of the existing quests. The only reason I can see you wouldn't want to do that is because you don't want to alienate players who are running it solo. I don't feel like this is a mutually incompatible idea though. The developers talked about having to cut additional companion quests, but I don't know. Firefly never had an episode about just one character. It always worked a character-focused story into a main plot that still affected everyone. The research that was being done on Roseway was minor, at least on the surface. I think I am supposed to be shocked that they took the risk of bringing Raptidons to Terra 2 just to create diet toothpaste, but that is completely unsurprising given that in reality, Raptidons aren't that dangerous. This is affirmed as being the case in-universe multiple times. As we leave Roseway, I'm left with a feeling of tonal dissonance. This was a sizable area for basically being an optional side diversion that has little impact. There is a single line of dialogue to acknowledge the toothpaste, but Cassandra and her outlaws do not matter at all. Imagine if later, when we meet the Iconoclast, there is actually a penalty for me having shot her. But like I said, it does fit in. It alludes that there might be deeper reasons than monsters for why Monarch was abandoned by the board. I don't see a good reason why Roseway couldn't have been better integrated into the broader game, considering that it's still better than the Vale. Since we got on the topic, I think the companions in Outer Worlds are surprisingly good. They've been changed somewhat to make them more of an active presence in the story. For instance, because of the ship, any companions you recruit are easily available. They can also interject in conversations, but as I said, oftentimes this is just quippy dialogue. I was going to praise Ellie for calling out one of the researchers for making aphrodisiacs, but it turns out most of the crew can do that as well. To introduce the roster, we picked up Parvati at Edgewater, and she is an engineer. Vicar Max joined us at Edgewater, but won't actually participate until after we leave. He is a religious worker under the system's corporate religion. On Groundbreaker, we can do a quest to recruit Ellie Fenhill, who is a doctor. We also picked up Felix on Groundbreaker, who's mostly just young muscle. We can complete a quest to activate a robot named Sam already aboard the ship, converting him for combat purposes. And finally, there is Nyoka, who is a hunter that lives in Stellar Bay. Neat thing is that the companion selection screen is a spectrum of opinions on the board. Sam doesn't care about the board since he's just a robot, but he's on the right because he was manufactured by the corporations. Ellie doesn't care either, being money-minded, but her spirit leans towards the freedom of the left side. The Vicar speaks for the board often. He serves as a good mediator because he doesn't blindly rationalize the hard lives of the people of Halcyon with the same empty platitudes that the people in Edgewater had. Life is hard, but if you show some level of conviction, it is possible to elevate yourself like he had. And he's basically on the same journey as the player when it comes to learning about just how deep the board's rabbit hole goes. Parvati is near the middle but pro-board. She grew up in a company town, and she's almost willingly blind towards the issues. She is naively trusting of spacers because, well, she was raised by spacers to do so. Felix is on the far left, being radically anti-board. He doesn't seem to comprehend that the cereals and the tossball leak he's a big fan of were tools of the board, but you have to forgive him. He is a young man who hasn't fully learned the full extent of the corrupt system that he lives within. He doesn't have any New Vegas videos from which he can develop an immense understanding of socialism. The writers suggested a timeline split happened in 1901 with the assassination of President McKinley instead failing. But that means that Karl Marx would have still gotten the word out since he died in 1883. The antitrust sentiment in America was still a thing, even if Roosevelt had remained the vice president. The rest of the world is also still a thing. Let's say that trust busting didn't happen. You would still see the socialist revolutions of the 20th century. Those didn't happen because of trust busting. And American socialists would have had a lot more ammunition, especially in Depression-era America. Really, I don't understand why a timeline split is even necessary. Are Obsidian trying to imply that megacorporations wouldn't have sufficient time to form between 2019 and 2285? That they haven't formed already? Are they advocates of the bull moose? Are they just trying to say trust busting might be a good idea? I guess I would be saying that too if I got bought by Microsoft. It's just an unnecessary but zany detail that people can post on Reddit as something they learned despite it having functionally nothing to do with the game. Nyoka is probably the most interesting in terms of opinions. She doesn't like the board, but she's pretty consistent. She's seen way too many people die to the hazards on Monarch to think that life without the board would be a good thing. She's not against reforms, but she's smart enough to know that if your goal is to help common people, burning the system down tends to trap those people in the fire. Bit of a surprise, since you wouldn't expect the writers to put those thoughts in the mouth of a character with, you know, she has certain phenotypical descriptors. It's because she's pink-haired. Get it? You thought I was going to say because she's black. Since we're on the topic, they really sabotaged Nyoka's introduction. She ended up being my second favorite companion, which surprised me given I refused to recruit her on the first playthrough. I think it's a great sign with a character when you wish they did more with her. She's introduced as a habitual drunk who tries to pitch the idea that we totally need her help to accomplish our mission on Monarch. Despite the fact that at this point I already knew that Monarch was safer than the Vale. It's a really off-putting introduction that ends up being subdued afterwards. Kind of a metaphor for the whole game, really. She stays a drinker throughout her time on the ship, but never again to the degree that we see at her introduction. It's less like we got her the caffeinoid to wake her up and more like we gave her an over-the-counter cure for alcoholism. Ellie and Felix seem to drink as much as she does, other than during her ability, which feels tonally disconnected from how she's generally presented in the writing. And it doesn't help that she asks us for a personal favor as soon as we step outside the door.
Hey, Cap. Got a minute?
Oh my god. You better not have some kind of side quest you want me to do.
Hey, got a favor to ask you.
All of the companions, other than Sam, have personal favors that they'll ask of the player. These quests can be a bit of a mixed bag. Ellie's, for instance, is just to go to meet her rich parents and then steal the money from her fraudulent life insurance policy. Ellie's a rich kid who didn't enjoy her life as a doctor in Byzantium, so she left to go rough it out as a mercenary. She's got enough experience at this point that she's not really a poser, but she's not really much of anything. Other companions have arcs, but Ellie just has a flat line. She's along for the ride, which might be fine if I didn't have a literal robot already filling that niche. I would compare her to Simon from Firefly. They're both rich kids who left high society, but Simon actually contributed to the crew. A lot of the drama on the show had to do with injuries, which gave him a lot of ground to work with to define him as a character.
I am very smart.
Ellie never serves a role as the ship's doctor. She doesn't even have the space to do it in. She's just a gun hand who has the medical stat. But so does Nyoka. I'm envisioning a system where companions could get injured and their rate of recovery is tied to the crew's highest medical score. Then, sometimes as part of the companions or even main quests, they get injured. It would probably feel arbitrary, but at the same time could give a lot of room to either roleplay as the doctor or give Ellie specific value in that role. But instead of being Simon, she's Jane, on a ship where almost every character is also Jane. I suppose the next obvious Firefly comparison is Parvati to Kaylee. She's the ship's engineer on a ship that never has any engineering problems aside from the power regulator at the start before she arrived. I suppose I don't need to say that Kaylee was also an important crew member, and that the ship breaking was a good source of drama. We really only have Parvati around if we want to spend less parts on repairing our equipment, which is so exceptionally minor that any words we've already said about it have already overstated its presence. Parvati's quest is, no joke, to hook her up with the head engineer on the Groundbreaker. It is interesting that player romance isn't in Outer Worlds, then again, thank God. I can't be the only person who thought Commander Shepard having sex with his subordinates was a little weird. Garrus' best girl. Oh, hey Sam. Other than the quest to activate him, Sam has the least going on aboard the ship. He's a robot and occasionally he tries to interface with the ship's AI. Kinda weird. Did Hawthorne add sexuality to Ada? Was this going to happen even if he lived through the drop pod incident? Felix! Felix has a quest where he gets contacted by someone he knew on the Groundbreaker, who's now operating a space piracy ring. Marlowe is one of the revolutionaries working in Halcyon who has a darker side, under the surface. He's where Felix learned most of the rhetoric, and this quest is about Felix learning the reality. Marlowe wants us to take out a traitor, but turns out things are more complicated as Marlowe works for the board. Whenever the board wants specific ships taken out, they'll conveniently leave them vulnerable and inform Marlowe. Marlowe will say he's doing this just to fund his revolution, and it's up to you to figure out if he's telling the truth, or if, like Cassandra, he's wearing this revolution business as a mask to cover his true intentions. Felix can also make the choice to run with Marlowe or stay with you, although you'd pretty much have to want him out of your crew to lose him. Felix doesn't really have an analog in Firefly. Pretty much his only value is as muscle, which is a problem for him when all the specialists aboard the ship provide the exact same value that he does. I figure each crew member should serve a niche on the crew, but also be an access point for different groups. Ellie represents Byzantium, Parvati the workers, Max the board, and Nyoka Monarch. There's one quest on the Groundbreaker where having Felix can help avoid a confrontation, and you can fire him after that, but I feel like Felix would be more interesting if it turned out that he'd been also making friends with every revolutionary in the system who had visited the Groundbreaker. Every time we run into somebody who's anti-board, they instantly recognize Felix. It could be a bit of a running joke that the Mask of the Naive Dock Worker was just covering the extent of Felix's social network. The only exception would be the Iconoclasts, but Felix should still be valuable as an in with that group. Nyoka is similar to Felix. Her story is concentrated on Monarch, so after we leave, there's not really much she has to offer the crew. She's a career hunter, which is not a terribly valuable position aboard a spaceship. I would definitely say she's the most like Jane. But despite being the ship's muscle, Jane served as a good source of conflict because he struggled with having a purchasable loyalty. I don't really know where Nyoka's loyalties lie or why she comes with us after we leave Monarch. I mean, technically, I guess it makes sense if you do her companion quest. I just wish you didn't have to leave Monarch and go back to the Vale to complete it. Nyoka wants our help in finding the burial sites of her old crew, as well as following up on some that managed to get off of Monarch. Turns out all her friends are dead though, and some of them weren't terribly honest about why they left either. Nyoka's story is pretty good at giving a human side to what had happened on Monarch. It's one thing to read about it on a terminal, it's another to have a character who's still having the events echo inside her head. She should be an extremely valuable insight on Stellar Bay and the Iconoclasts, but she really only does an alright job in that role. Vicar Max finally coming in first place as best girl aboard the Unreliable. I mean, it wasn't exactly a stiff competition. Max will sign on if you find a book for him back in the Vale, but because the book is written in French and he needs to find somebody who can translate it. I think it's an appropriately hilarious character motivation. He ends up staying on, largely because he recognizes that whatever he does on this journey will be more spiritually fulfilling than Edgewater. His analog is obviously Shepard Book, a passenger aboard Serenity who'd already reached his destination when he stepped aboard. Only Book was a mystery. Max flat out states pretty much everything there is to know about him. Then again, being that we are his therapist, it's appropriate. If there's any one thing I learned about Max, it was that little trick he learned in prison. Max left his life as a common worker to go pursue a higher position in the OSI, but some of his heretical thinking saw him serving time in prison, still as a vicar. Max has anger issues, but also a lot of self-doubt about the decisions he's made in life. And not just that, but if you complete his quest and do some mind-altering substances with him, his personality will reform, and he'll come to a better understanding about himself. And this change is compensated for in the story, as his reactions and dialogue will differ based on whether or not you've completed his companion quest yet. In other words, he is the only companion which has an arc through the story. Most of the characters either stay the same or have single-line realizations about the truth, and then their arc is in the credits. My favorite part of Max, though, is that if you're high intelligence, you can get him to acknowledge that you always had everything figured out before he did. But yeah, that combined with his ability to provide insight in a lot of situations makes him the best companion. And there's Sam. Sam's not much of a character, but I still love him. He's worth bringing out anytime there are robotic enemies, and at one point a character was in disbelief that I left their fate up to the decision-making of a janitation robot. And at one point a character was in disbelief that I left their fate up to the decision-making of a sanitation robot. It would be neat if the ship was noticeably altered by Sam's cleaning, since you're guaranteed to see the pre-Sam ship prior to repairing him. It would also make him the most valuable crew member besides Ada, since he would actually do something for the ship. Ada is the AI pilot. She's stated to be unusually sophisticated thanks to tinkering by Hawthorne. The AI in this setting isn't smart, largely being chatbots that allow you to interface with technology, more VI than AI. She does Wash's job on the ship and has some hang-ups about Hawthorne's death. The funny thing is that she actually contributes more to some missions than most of her human counterparts. Then again, you can't fire her. You know the problem here? This ship doesn't have a captain. I mean, we are the captain, but it doesn't have Malcolm Reynolds. Reynolds is a pretty interesting character that serves as a good litmus test for role-playing games. The closer you can get to playing his character accurately, the better the RPG is. That's because the game's giving you a line between being good and getting paid, which often serves as just a binary. Firefly is largely a character piece about Malcolm Reynolds. He's definitely the main character, just like we are, but he is a character in his own right. Being an RPG, Outer Worlds does not want to define us as a character, giving us as much room as possible to write our own version of the captain. I think it throws a huge wrench into the cogs of the Unreliable as a ship. Reynolds' relationship with each crew member was integral to the show. He didn't just resolve conflicts aboard the ship, he would also start them. I think this is why the character dynamics in the Mass Effect games tend to be far more functional than in Outer Worlds. Shepard is a defined character in many aspects, and that allows the writer more latitude to then define what his relationships are with the other characters. No matter what happens, you are a paternal figure for Grunt. as an example. In this instance, it's impossible for Outer Worlds to resolve its desire to copy New Vegas and Firefly at the same time, and as a result, the captaincy is really a void. The problem is, the crew members are almost completely non-reactive to the player, and the few times they are, people like to complain. Of course the Anarchist has a problem with us siding with the government. It's the only time a crew member created a conflict aboard the ship. Otherwise everybody just gets along in this little cult of personality that we call a crew. You can't really be a captain if you never have any kind of leadership responsibility. I tried to look this up and found that apparently the only way to actually alienate these people was to kill their friends or loved ones, which there's no reason to do outside of doing a genocide run. I don't really feel like a captain trying to hold a crew together because there's barely any conflicts or needs for these people. Okay, imagine for a second that the doctor position on the ship was actually important, and Ellie is perfect for it, but she has a demand to get paid. You have to keep finding jobs and getting her cuts, and she gets alienated anytime we take on free work. Only after a quest when we secure her life insurance payout does she ease up on this requirement. Or Parvati's role as the engineer is actually important at points in the storyline, but she has massive moral hangups because she feels responsible for anything evil we do with the ship that she maintains. Each crew member just adds their needs and stipulations until you have this web of conflicting interpersonal dramas, and then you can have these situations that unfold. For instance, Ellie and Felix get into a fight where Felix points out that her refusal to engage in charity work is no different than the life in Byzantium that she is running away from. And then Ellie gets defensive because part of her new identity is being attacked. And it's not just in the story of the crew, they don't need their gear maintained either. Pretty much the only requirement is that you get them new equipment and improve it, and that's just on Supernova difficulty. But it doesn't need to be repaired, and they don't need to eat, nor do they request any payment. So it's weird that the captain's the only person on the ship who's eating and sleeping like a normal person despite looking like an eldritch vampire. A simple element I do like about the companions is that they'll chat with each other occasionally, and there are a lot of these conversations. It's a basic thing to expect, but I'm glad they made time to write and implement these small character interactions. Overall, like a lot of things in the game, the Unreliable and its crew is the foundation of a really good idea that didn't pan out due to design and time limitations. As a result, the companions end up hilariously serving as little more than stat buffs. By the end of the run, I respect to where if I wore the correct gear and brought out the relevant companions, I could pass any level 150 skill check in the entire game, barring very rare weapon checks, which is a whole topic we'll have to discuss after we open the can on Monarch. Monarch has one of the best conversations right at the start in Stellar Bay. Your companions will consistently contribute more than just quips, meaning that there is a potential 5-way dialogue to be had. You know, a genuine reason to give them a voice in conversations.
I had hoped that livening up our advertisements with enticing figures would draw the other corporations back to our bosom, but it seems we're back to the drawing board.
'Cause he's scared to go it alone. You need the board to hold your hand and tell you everything's gonna be okay. Ain't that right?
Surviving alone isn't as easy as it looks. Thanks to the so-called hazard clause, Monarch has been cut off from the board's resources and protection for 10 years now.
So-called is right. We've got our hazards, but we're still here. The board took off without so much as a thought for the folks left behind.
That's the board's way. Doesn't matter if you're Monarch or the Groundbreaker. If the board can't control you, they'll find a way to punish you.
Now, we've kept ourselves in business by trading with individual corporations, but given the off-the-books nature of those transactions, such arrangements are precarious.
Exactly what I would have said, if I'd been paying attention. You talk like Graham.
Freedom always sounds nice, doesn't it? It makes a rather pretty slogan. But if you sit down and tally up the costs, how you provide for yourself in the absence of aid, how you protect yourself from a hostile galaxy, it starts to lose its shine.
Exactly. Intellectualism fuels the train to mankind's future, but the tracks the train runs on are forged from practicality.
What?
Yes, it's as though the good vicar has plucked the very words from my brain.
Can't imagine why you'd sneer at the notion of a free colony. Could it be because you're an agent of the establishment?
Monarch's a free planet, Felix. It's also I ain't a fan of the folks on the board, but if they could be wrangled to rebuild our roads, I'd welcome the help.
Your friend makes a good point, young man. I used to be young and idealistic too, but you can't run a city on high-minded ideals.
Indeed. Mr. Nandi here has a rather ingenious plan to get MSI restored to the board.
On our terms, mind you. Returning to the board is your only chance if you hope to survive here on Monarch. That doesn't mean it'll be easily achievable.
Indeed not. No worthwhile plan was ever simple. That's what I always say.
Are you out of your mind? You can't just go crawling back to your old masters.
Well, we can't continue to subsist like this either. Why wouldn't anyone? They own nearly all the resources and infrastructure in Halcyon.
Without the board, chaos would overtake the system. Working within the established order isn't a principle to snub one's nose at, Captain.
If you can't beat him, might as well join him and reach into their pockets.
To be on the board is to be part of the colonial community, and being cut off means slow strangulation.
I found myself being very impressed with the game at this moment because I felt like this was where the game was finally going to get good and justify Emerald Vale. Stellar Bay is another salt tuna cannery, but operated far closer to how you might expect. Workers have more rights, more autonomy, less brainwashing, and less disease. It's not perfect, but it is theirs. Suddenly Edgewater didn't seem like a mistake, at least for a time, because it was contrast material with how much better this place could be. But that really ended up not being the case, as Monarch slowly began to fall apart the longer I was there. Stellar Bay is a competent start. It's run by flawed human beings, and it's going to take more than just internal reform to fix Halcyon's problems, but the flaws are understandable, and it's easy to see that MSI will still play an important role in rehabilitating the system in addition to everything else that we do. But I think it's entirely possible that what I'm seeing is a mature position that the evil wrought by corporations is a reflection of the individuals within them and not the system itself, is not actually the intended interpretation. If you force Monarch to fall within the lines of the anarchy versus the board debate, MSI would be the board. Both factions on Monarch are very flawed to show issues with their side, and I think I'm supposed to look at MSI as being incompetent fools who are stupid for thinking their solution would actually force the other corporations to change. This interpretation makes a lot of sense once you play out the Iconoclast story. The Iconoclasts are hyped up to be the ultimate rebels against the system, but they end up being little more than a gang living out in the wilds of a quarantined world. The Groundbreaker is firmer resistance to the board, but that's likely the point. These people's ideas are the threat to the status quo, not necessarily the people themselves. But their leader, Graham Bryant, is extremely flawed. When we arrive, we find that unlike Stellar Bay, the Iconoclasts are on the edge of internal division. Bryant is focused on continuing to spread his message, by any means necessary, but his second-in-command, Blackwood, is more focused on keeping their organization alive. That sounds like a reasonable position, but give it a minute. Also, it bears mentioning that there's no equivalent conversation with the Iconoclasts like the one I put together out of the Stellar Bay dialogue. I think it goes to show just how much the MSI conversation raised the bar for a game in a way that they could never match again. I'd be really curious to know the context of why that conversation in particular ended up being so different. The first issue is that the determining outcome for this entire faction is just in the first quest. This is one of the only times in the game where the player is forced to choose first without being provided all of the information, and then being forced to play through the quest line. We don't know the full extent of the Iconoclast situation when we're forced to choose between Graham Bryant's data cartridges and supplies. Would it be possible for both to get what they want? No, it's a binary decision, and if you want the good outcome, you better get those supplies now. Okay. The next quest does let us give both sides what they want if we go above and beyond, but it's already too late. You might as well sacrifice these guys if you got those data cartridges earlier, because it's so Jover. Weirdly as well, this is a situation where there's a pressing medical issue, but the player is not given a medical check to try and help. The game is usually very consistent with the idea that if there is a problem related to a skill, the player can usually use their skill to help. Extra confusing because Nyoka, the Monarch companion, has the medical skill. We finally got a peg, the right shape for the hole, but now it's just too big to fit. Okay. Ignore the phrasing and focus on the literal metaphor, please. Of course, this is all we have to do to accomplish our objective on Monarch and move on with the main quest. And honestly, it's probably better that you do. Our goal here is to get MSI and the Iconoclast to stop jamming up the local frequencies, because I guess the writers saw that extra credits video about Spectrum Crunch.
I don't know how to put this, but we're running out of bandwidth in the air. I know that just sounds bizarre, but it's absolutely true. Soon there won't be enough bandwidth available in the air around us to support all of our bandwidth needs. Well, as you probably know, all data transfer over the airwaves comes in the form of radiation. Everything from the radio you hear on your car stereo to the data you transfer to browse the web on your cell phone. And, well, there's only a limited band of wavelengths that we can use effectively to transfer information, and that band can't be infinitely subdivided because of destructive interference.
Like, isn't it funny that they're so incompetent that their broadcasts are canceling each other out? No, not really. Considering I'm surprised Blackwood's just okay with Graham paying to run such a transmitter. Probably the closest I've ever actually ended up on a government watch list would be looking up information on what it would take to broadcast to enough frequencies to effectively interfere with an entire area's communications. My general consensus seems to be that it would be impossible to do this accidentally, and I don't see a good reason why MSI or the Iconoclast would be trying to intentionally signal jam each other, considering they aren't in direct conflict yet. When we finally do clear the airwaves, we just so happen to be witness to a crashing gunship falling from the blockade. Both factions want the weapons from the gunship as salvage and will ask us to bring them the targeting module. They're going to acquire weapons on their own time, but they need us to specifically fetch the much smaller targeting module, which is located inside the same ship that they can't reach due to it being too dangerous. It's an arbitrary conflict where these two groups are going to go to war because there's only one MacGuffin, and if you want to make peace, then you'll need to replace Graham with Blackwood as the leader of the Iconoclasts. Or, if you didn't do that, you could just grab the targeting module and leave. Hard to fight a war when neither side's going to be able to operate the big cannon. Yeah, that's the secret peace ending. The best reward is the one you don't turn in. The issue is that Blackwood's proposal for how she'll run the Iconoclast is basically to just make them outlaws. Just a hair above marauders, really. And it's already decided. The only decision that mattered in this questline was the very first. Nothing you do after impacts your ability to convince Blackwood to become the leader. I am sure she felt really stupid about accusing us of being too much like Graham and her ideals, as we kicked down the door on their last line of defense and killed Graham, and then her. Once again, we're not allowed to knock sense into people with threats of choosing the other side. But maybe she has a point? On both my playthroughs I made the same mistake, but on my first I was at least willing to replay the quest to get the peaceful ending. On Supernova though, yeah, I wasn't going to undo 8 hours of progress, even though I had an ulterior motive for actually trying to get to the peace ending. Blackwood knows the truth about Graham, and I wanted to expose that directly to Felix. Sorry, but I just realized Graham Bryant is sharing a name with Joshua Graham, and that might throw people off. I wouldn't be surprised if this was intentional to criticize that character. You cannot get the truth on Graham unless you choose Blackwood in the very first quest. It's a surprising level of Bethesda tier quest design, and unfortunately this is not going to be the last time that I say those words. I don't know if siding with Graham is supposed to be a trap, like he's supposed to be so obviously inconsistent with his ideology that most people would immediately side with Zora over him instead. I feel like the writers did not anticipate that I wouldn't care in the slightest that they're starving, or at the very least, I felt like the game was going to later give me the option to pay, I don't know, 10,000 bits for the supplies they need, and I'd have to smuggle them in myself. I am doing other smuggling jobs on Monarch as it is. Plus, Sublight's treated as a valid alternative, who I work for, so the supply choice really didn't seem like the big deal it maybe should have been, considering I am locked out of an entire quest. Sublight is the silver bullet of the Iconoclast dilemma, and it was actually going to be part of the main quest line, likely before Monarch as a means of getting to the planet via the Sublight base. It's not fair to criticize a story entirely based on cut content, except Sublight isn't cut content, only its main quest integration is. Most players on the Wells route will have gotten a recommendation to join Sublight after Roseway. My point in bringing up Sublight is that the writers and designers had to have known that the player was going to have a connection to the faction, and that such a connection existing would have had big implications for the plotline. There's no reason we can't repair our relationship with Blackwood by offering her pro bono smuggling work to make up for our earlier decision. I don't mind the decision having consequences, so much as I mind not being given the opportunity to use the extremely obvious solution to the problem to get us back into Blackwood's good graces. And the thing is that it would be a knock-on decision. There are two outcomes for Sublight. Either we end up in an executive position or we get fired. There's another decision during Sublight set on Monarch that could alienate our contact who lives here. Tying these two questlines together would be both a simple integration, but also create a wonderful complexity of options to give the decisions made during Sublight more meaning. So what exactly did Graham do? Okay, so the guy who runs the radio transmission station, Budget Mr. Universe, proposed that MSI could take over Terra 1 by not evacuating and become the sole owner of the planet, which they renamed to Monarch. But not all the MSI executives were on board with this plan, so Graham arranged to have some space pirates come along to Amber Heights, who would wipe them out in the night, and leave Sanjar, who was on board with the plan, to stay as the sole executive. Look, I know I'm not supposed to just assume things about certain people. But in every other instance in this game, unnamed corporate executives are a source of constant conflict and negligence.
Yeah, I was the closest living person relative to his body at time of death.
This is less an issue with the writing here and more an issue with the writing in the rest of the game. I think the worst thing that Graham does here is feel regret. Okay, so in a well-written game, killing executives would have been a more nuanced position. There might have been good people who were killed by Graham's actions, but what did Blackwood think being an iconoclast was going to entail? If they were ever successful, say in 5 years, what did she think they were going to be doing to the corporate masters? Politely asking them to stop? Was she just here for the feeling of community? Honestly, going off of what some of the members say, if Graham just came out and said, yeah, I did kill these people, Blackwood would instantly lose all of her leverage. I don't think the average iconoclast soldier gives a shit. The iconoclast peaceful ending is basically the same as an MSI victory anyways. I should clarify, since it had been a minute since I played the quest, Zora didn't know Graham had done this. She just didn't trust us to give us the mission that would lead to us discovering this information, and also the quest can't be completed without then giving it to her. So I'm actually giving her far too much credit in being a master manipulator of the situation, and also giving the story far too much credit as well. It seems like evidence of Graham doing this would be a bigger deal, and who we turn it into could drastically change things. So the fact that the only allowed outcome of the quest is that it gets turned into Zora further affirms that we are just on a pre-scripted roller coaster ride where the only decision we ever made was at the very start. I really don't understand why the Iconoclast storyline was built like this. There are many instances where I can go, but if this was New Vegas, then this would have happened instead. I think the key thing here, on that note, is that we are not applying that standard to a random side quest. The Iconoclast dilemma is one of the central conflicts that the game has. Arguably, Monarch is the game's single most important sequence for its narrative theming. These aren't a few forgotten details in a corner of the map. These decisions and design were some of the most impactful to the game's story that were made. If there was any one storyline that should be knocking it out of the park in Outer Worlds, this is it. Multiple choices, branching narratives, complex character backgrounds, motivations, relationships. That's the problem with the Iconoclasts. They get relegated to the same level of narrative complexity as, say, those ghouls that wanted to fly the rocket in New Vegas. Another thing is that the story focuses on the performance reviews of these characters, but the odd part is that the writer seems to be of the mind that the corporations were actually effective at categorizing people with high accuracy, because all of the reviews we read perfectly correspond to the characters. So Graham was always destined to be a bad leader because a personality quiz said so. That's pretty bleak. Whereas you might typically expect at least one of the characters to have gotten a poor review, but to be capable of so much more than the corporation had thought, hence why they decided to rebel against the system. For the briefest moment, Outer Worlds had a moment of lucid quality before quickly relapsing into its tonal catastrophe of awkward humor, weak corporate criticism, and bad world building. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the punchline is that the inciting incident for Graham really was that they didn't let him use commas as liberally as he wanted to. It's not surprising that 60% of players are gone before they even complete the quest to clear up the radio waves on Monarch. Anor Londo filters fewer players than Monarch. The writing does not strike a successful balance between humor and drama, and so you have these weird stories where I'm not sure how much investment is appropriate. Because every time you make a joke out of something that I thought was serious, it gets harder for me to take seriously the things that aren't supposed to be jokes.
Hayes' idea. Clara, Hayes, Anders, Rebecca, Opal, Nyoka. Charon. He said it was some old myth, something about death and all the things we killed.
And if the point is not to take any of it seriously and to just enjoy the game, bro, because of its humor, well, that's an even better reason to stop playing Outer Worlds. Also, at this point, it becomes obvious that there's a full ending for these dilemmas, but these full endings might not align with what you, the player, wants. For example, a big sticking point of the conflict is that Sanjar decided that the MSI smugglers supplying the Iconoclasts were no longer allowed to make deals with them. In other words, things were fine as long as Sanjar hadn't made this decision. So it seems like replacing Sanjar to keep Graham seems like just as valid an option as replacing Graham. What's interesting is that Graham is the second to last of the anarchists pushing back against the board. If you consider all of these characters, every single one of them is presented as being deeply flawed individuals. That's not a bad thing, but it was at this point in the first playthrough that I realized the actual theme of the game was not that armed revolutionaries are complex people, but just nihilism. Conflicts are more complicated than they seem, and that sucks. Being an adult is hard, guys. Let's just smoke weed and watch Rick and Morty. There's no right answer, and we're gonna make sure there's an asterisk to every decision that you make. Probably just so that people on the internet can accuse you of being an extremist because you picked the other side of a binary option in a video game than they had. Like, consider for a moment that the Stormcloaks versus Imperials decision in Skyrim is more mature about how it handles a conflict between two flawed factions than Outer Worlds has been up to this point. And that was Skyrim, the game that pits nationalists versus imperialists. If this really was a New Vegas spiritual sequel, then Graham Bryant would not feel regret about what he did. There would actually be a mature dialogue about whether the thing Halcyon needs is internal reform like what MSI is planning, or a violent revolution like what the Iconoclasts are planning. Zora Blackwood would be a better voice of reason. Graham Bryant should represent violent change, but Blackwood should represent revolution through free living. The Iconoclasts are free. Instead of wasting their time trying to change Halcyon, they should focus on maintaining their freedom from the board and let the success of their independence be what changes the system. Live by example. Monarch is a microcosm of the broader conflict. This is a valuable educational opportunity about how these two options might play out, and you still have plenty of time to switch sides if you realize the option you were supporting was wrong, based on lessons you learned from Monarch. But that's what a serious game would do, and we're just here to have a good time. The Outer Worlds didn't have the development time to fully realize its vision, but it also doesn't seem to have had that great of a full vision to realize. I don't think more polish and time was going to make the game good. I hope this doesn't mean anything going forward. After we clear up the radio waves, the information broker running the comm station on Monarch sends Phineas the information he needs on the chemicals we're looking for to revive the Hope's colonists. Yeah, it's kind of easy to forget that we aren't just a traveling problem solver. Phineas determines our next step is to head to Byzantium. This is where the quest diverges and where I figure most people are likely to have their first contact with the board side of the quest line. It's kind of interesting. For example, should we switch teams now, Monarch doesn't become a total waste of time as the board also wants you to complete that quest. The difference is that they want MSI and the Iconoclast broadcast ended due to being thought crime. But if you decide to turn Phineas in back on the Groundbreaker, then you'll be expected to do Monarch later in the game. So it's not a typical binary questline where you complete the exact same steps at the exact same times, but for a different colored team. It would have given the game more replay value had the board been a better faction,